want this share to be in dedication to the well-being of Leah Bas Esther and all the Cholim of Klal Yisrael. And Kevin, can you please teach us halachas? You do a wonderful job every day teaching us.
Okay. Let's continue now. We're continuing with the book about Shulchan Mishnah Berurah on Shabbat. Okay. So these are very contemporary issues. So the next issue they're going to discuss is car repairs done by a non-Jew over Shabbat. And the question is asked, or was asked, is it permitted to leave a car with a non-Jewish mechanic on Friday afternoon, even though the mechanic may repair the car on Shabbat? And the discussion is as follows. It is clearly forbidden to expressly ask a non-Jewish mechanic to repair the car on Shabbos. Moreover, even if there was no express request to repair the car on Shabbos, but the mechanic would have no time other than Shabbos to repair the car, that is considered as if he is being asked expressly to repair the car on Shabbos, and it is strictly forbidden to do so. It is prohibited, therefore, to bring a car for repair late on Friday and ask to pick it up on Saturday night, immediately after Shabbat. If, however, the car was brought in with enough time to repair it before or after Shabbos, but the mechanic chooses to do the job on Shabbos, that is of no concern to us, since the work being done on Shabbos is not the result of the car owner's specific instructions, but rather by choice of the non-Jewish mechanic, which is permitted. This is permitted even if the mechanic clearly states in advance that he will do the work on Shabbos. It is therefore permitted to bring a car in for repairs on Friday afternoon, right before Shabbos, and ask the mechanic if it can be picked up first thing Monday morning, even if this particular mechanic is always closed on Saturday night and Sundays, and the work will surely be done over Shabbos. This is permitted because in fact, there is enough time for the mechanic to repair the car after Shabbos. The fact that the car will be repaired on Shabbos due to the decision of the mechanic, not to the instruction of the Jew. In a case where the mechanic is unable to repair the car at any other time other than Shabbos, due to circumstances beyond his control, for example, part needed for repair cannot be purchased at any time other than Shabbos, that may be considered as if the mechanic is being instructed to repair the car on Shabbos and would be forbidden. Okay, so
that's a surprise, Kevin. It's a surprise to me.
What's this, the whole thing or that last point?
No, the fact that if you're expecting the car Monday morning and you know he does
yes.
on a Sunday because he does the Enchir cake thing in rugby, and he's not going to come in on Saturday night to the middle of Weinberg or Sando, otherwise they'll bludgeon him to death and steal all his contents. You know it's not going to be ready first thing on Monday morning. So if you give him that edict, if you know he operates on a Shabbos, you've in fact constrained his time to only work on Shabbos. I don't understand.
Yeah, no, I agree with you.
That's exactly my
He's not going to work on Sunday.
Yeah.
Unless he specifically, the guy agrees to it, maybe he will out of exceptional circumstances.
Well, of course he will. Nudge, nudge, wink, wink. They all go to, they all go to the vet. There's a halacha that you're not allowed to spay your animal or neuter your animal, but they all go to the vet and go like this to the vet. Can you look after Fluffy for me for the day? We'll pick him up, and Fluffy is not a happy camper when they pick him up because he's had his knackers chopped off. Yeah. No, I'm serious. I know somebody that was studying veterinary science that told me he never became a vet for that reason, for that halacha. I'm not quite sure why he didn't.
He didn't have the balls for it, Damon.
He didn't have the balls for it. Okay. All right. And on that holy note, let's begin.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. So we were up to the part where we were discussing this past tense, future tense sort of retroactive forgiveness or foretelling forgiveness. So if you remember, we were on the 69th daf, Aleph, and the Gemara made a suggestion. Because Basically, Rav Yochanan's opinion seemed to go against the anonymous Mishnah, at which you cannot argue. That's why Revi made it an anonymous opinion. And it was saying that even if you say that the anonymous Mishnah was concluded in explanation by Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, you got a problem, because Rabba Bava Kamma said in the name of Rav Yochanan, is that the problem is that except for the opinions regarding a guarantor, the get that was given in Sidon, and the latter case of evidence in Sanhedrin, the reality is all our halachas, we agree whenever Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel brings it to the fore. So which means, since it's not one of those three cases, Rav Yochanan would have to agree, just like he would with the anonymous opinion. So the issue is now, how do we get it to make sense? So the Gemara makes a proposal, and this is where we ended off yesterday. The Gemara answers, they said, do not say the Mishnah reads, the discrete ones place down their coins and say, because remember, guys, what happens is there's a physical act of putting your coins down, and then there's a declaration. Okay? So it says, they say, they say whatever was picked from this vineyard, that's the original interpretation. And what does that imply? Well, very simply, the term was picked, past tense, denotes that the discrete ones were redeeming the fruits after they had already been picked and stolen by the passers-by, when they were no longer in the possession of the original owner. So that would obviously not accord if that statement was done and after it was stolen, the discrete one said that. It's very difficult because Rav Yochanan said they don't have the power to do it, because if the article is not in possession of the owner, they cannot sell it, consecrate it, or give away what's not in their possession. So it says, rather let us interpret the verse and say, whatever will be picked from this vineyard. Okay? In other words, the term will be picked, future tense, denotes that the discrete ones were redeeming the fruits that would be picked and stolen by passers-by. So the fruits were still in the possession of the discrete ones when they redeemed them. So in the morning, they could look at what was still in the field and say, if anything here is stolen, we forgive the thief, we deconsecrated with coins, so he's not eating produce forbidden by Torah law because they're still consecrated and you're not allowed to eat them. We forgive them for theft, we'll give it to them as a gift. So the practice then of the discrete ones therefore does not contradict Rav Yochanan's ruling that the original owner of the stolen article cannot consecrate it because it's not in his possession. Does that make sense? So in other words, the view of the discrete ones then might indeed be that of the anonymous Mishnah rather than the conclusion of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel's statement. Because Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel is talking about a case of after it was picked. Whereas the anonymous Mishnah, they could say, well, maybe it's saying will be picked. So in other words, then it doesn't contradict Rav Yochanan. And in fact, the two don't necessarily contradict each other because they're then talking about the same thing, about redeeming consecrated fruits with coins in the fourth year, and those coins are taken to Jerusalem to buy produce there. So as far as that's concerned, that's exactly what I would suggest. Does that make sense, guys?
Yeah.
Okay. I want you, just before I proceed on, to give it back to me. Any of you. Can any of you explain conceptually what we're talking about here? And then I can immediately move on.
I'm too dizzy. I don't think I can do it. Kevin, can you try or not? You're also not great.
I can only give the bottom line that nothing can be consecrated unless it's in the possession of the owner, can't consecrate it unless it's in his possession. And I know you were talking yesterday, you were discussing deconsecrating fruit that was taken on coins for them to be taken to the Beit HaMikdash. But that's the bottom line. That I
can add a little bit. I can add a little bit.
Okay, sure.
Just a little bit. Sorry, I can't recall everything.
Sure.
Sorry, I'm not in a great way. So what I can add is, if Kevin didn't say it, I don't think he said it exactly, is that the primary thing here is there's two scenarios, whether you forgive them in advance, whether you forgive them while it's in your possession, or you forgive them after they've already stolen it. So if you forgive them after they've already stolen it, it's too late because it's not in your possession. You can't forgive somebody for somebody if it doesn't belong to you anymore. So you have to do it in advance. If you do it in advance, and you pre-warn them, not pre-warn them. If you forgive them while it's still in your possession, and you leave the coins and all of that in advance, then you're covered.
Excellent. So we're saying that that's a way that perhaps the discreet ones and Rav Yochanan agree, but then you have to have that issue where the discreet ones forgive the thieves in advance as opposed to retroactively after the theft is stolen, because you can't say, I give to you, you've taken it. So exactly that, because up until this point, it seemed as though the anonymous Mishnah, or Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, was indeed teaching that it was after the incident that it was forgiven. So the Gemara is proposing this as a solution, guys. So the Gemara then asked, but did Rav Yochanan indeed say so? Why? Rav Yochanan said the discreet ones, and Rav Dosa said one and the same thing. And Rav Dosa clearly says whatever was picked in the past tense. So now we've got a problem, because when the Mishnah in Ma'aser Sheni, chapter 5, verse 1, discusses this, it discusses a discreet one and Rav Dosa's opinion. So if they can analyze from saying that the opinion of both are the same, and Rav Dosa uses the wording whatever was picked, the problem reasserts itself that Rav Yochanan said, well, how do you forgive somebody afterwards? Because you might conceptually forgive them, but you can't give it to them since they've already taken it. It's not in your possession. Does that make sense? In other words, if I have Coca-Cola in my fridge and I know somebody's going to take it because they're desperate, and I say, here, have it, because I don't want them to have an act of theft against them. I mean, that act of theft is also a problem apart from the consecration issue. Then I can do it while the Coca-Cola is in my hand. But if they've run off with it, I might be able to say the word, I forgive you. But according to Rav Yochanan, it's meaningless, because you might forgive in your heart, but you can't give up what is not in your possession. That's the bottom line of what Gavin's saying. So now we're saying there's a problem, because the discreet ones who made this act to forgive the poor, because remember, many of the Jews said that we shouldn't leave markings about that it's in its fourth year, because if they commit that sin, they should be responsible for both the theft and eating consecrated products, because they know they're doing wrong, they're stealing. Whereas the discreet one said, we'll forgive you anyway and make sure we can deconsecrate it to take that sin off you as well as the sin of theft. So if Rav Dosa clearly says whatever was picked in the past tense, and the discreet ones agree with that, then this proposal of what was picked compared to what shall be picked is in a way a little bit irrelevant, because the issue with Rav Yochanan comes up. Again, the same conflict. So it was taught in a brisa. Rav Yehuda says, now this is Rav Yehuda, in the morning the owner of the field stands and says, whatever the poor will gather today shall be ownerless. So Rav Yehuda is of the opinion that, so Rav Yehuda will agree with Rav Yochanan, the declaration was made in the morning, Kevin, while it was still in the owner's possession. Okay? So it said, Rav Yehuda says, in the morning, the owner of the field stands and says, whatever the poor will gather today shall be ownerless. Okay? And Rav Dosa says something completely different. Towards evening time, he says, whatever the poor gathered shall be ownerless. Meaning that in contrast to Rav Yehuda, Rav Dosa holds that the declaration of ownerlessness was made after the poor had already taken the 3 ears of grain improperly. So in other words, Rav Yochanan would have a problem with Rav Dosa, but he wouldn't have a problem with Rav Yehuda. And if Rav Dosa agrees with the discrete ones, then there's a problem because of Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel on the anonymous Mishnah that we have to go according to both of them, because both of them can't be refuted in halacha, except for those 3 incidents with Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, but it's not relevant here. So what's this issue about ownerless? Because, hang on, we were talking about discrete ones, and now we're talking about the owners of the property. So what we're talking about is as follows, is this is not a case of, what do you call it, revay fruits, fruits in their 4th year that still need to be redeemed. This is talking in a different Mishnah. This is in Peah chapter 6, verses 5. It's not in Ma'aser Sheni chapter 5, verse 1, but it deals with a similar sort of issue of retroactive forgiveness or forgiveness before the event. So basically, in Mishnah Peah, it says one of the gifts to the poor that a Jewish landowner must give is called leket. Do you know what leket is, Kev? You know your Hebrew.
It's a type of offering, or no, it's measurement, I think, or
you're right in that it's a measurement, but leket actually means gleanings. So if I say to you, I take the gleanings from the pan, it means when I pull out the roast chickens, there's still a bit of sauce there and roasting oil or whatever. It's the remnants, so to speak. So in other words, when you're harvesting, there's always going to be some stuff that falls to the ground. So the gleanings are the ears of grain that fall to the ground during harvesting. Okay? So the Mishnah states, according to Beis Hillel, that 2 ears of grain are leket, but 3 are not. So in other words, if 1 or 2 ears fall, they are leket and belong to the poor. They become ownerless, and they are gathered by the poor. But if 3 ears fall together from the harvester, they are not leket, and they remain the property of the owner. So I want you to bear in mind one thing. It's not that if 3 fall, that the poor can pick up 2 and the 1 goes back to the owner. It doesn't work like that. It doesn't say, Beis Hillel doesn't say, well, the 2 can be kept and the 1 is returned. He said, no, if 2 or less fall, it belongs to the poor. If 3 fall together, they belong to the owner. You don't separate them and then just keep the 2. So, because it comes out of the harvester. So, since they remain the property of the owner, what happens is many poor people don't know this halacha by Rav Hillel. They're under the assumption that even if 3 ears of wheat or whatever fell together, the poor can take it, because it's not a huge quantity, it's a gleaning. But the owner, therefore, declares ownerless all the ears that the poor gather. That's according to Rashi. So that they are not unwittingly involved in theft. You know, because we don't want them to transgress the prohibition against stealing, because they're not aware of the halacha. It's different to somebody that comes and breaks in your property and steals your fruit. That thief knows what he's doing. The poor here are under the assumption that what the harvester left over, they can have it, even if it's 3. So they shouldn't be they shouldn't have a sin against them if they don't know anymore. So the fact of it is, you can't. If somebody, Kevin, drinks poison, right? But they don't know it's poison, do they die?
Yeah.
So yes. So if you transgress halacha, there's something saying that ignorance is not bliss, because if you sign a term and condition contract with a cell phone company, if you didn't read the clauses, that's your problem. That's actually your problem. So in other words, it's not malicious theft, but it's still what you call negligent theft. In other words, you haven't learned the halacha, but maybe the poor are a bit simple, and they just, they're simple Jews that need a bit of food or whatever. So the owners take mercy on them, and therefore they declare the ears of grain or wheat ownerless in order to prevent the poor from unwittingly transgressing the prohibition against eating tevel. So what's this? It's a case not only, guys, of theft, it's a case of tevel, untarred produce. So basically, the poor person, in other words, the general, according to Rashi, the prohibition is against theft. According to Tosfot, you've got this other issue of tevel, because he maintains that the owner declares the ears ownerless in order to prevent the poor from unwittingly transgressing the prohibition against eating tevel, untarred produce. So I had to look and read this carefully, because the poor person who takes 3 ears of grain, thinking that they are leket, when in fact only 2 are leket, will eat them without separating the tithes for the gifts of the poor, are indeed exempt from tithes. That's according to Tosfot. So in other words, if however the 3 ears are not leket and they don't belong to the poor, they're subject to tithing. So the owner therefore exempt the ears from tithes, declaring them ownerless. So it's ownerless from theft, and it's ownerless from the tithing. Does that make sense? There's 2 issues we're worried about there. Because in other words, what's left to the poor doesn't have to be tithed. But if it's more than the poor are entitled to, they're taking more than they're entitled to, which according to Rashi is an act of unwitting theft. According to Tosfot, they're eating untithed produce. They're not entitled to. They have to separate that one particular ear of corn or wheat or whatever the case may be. So the owner forgives them of that and says, listen, whatever you took extra, if you were ignorant, I'll give it to you as though it's yours, to the poor. So then a poor person is exempt from tithes. But we still have there the same issue as we did in Ma'aser Sheni. The case of if they're forgiven in the morning, according to Rabbi Yehuda, which agrees with Rav Yochanan, according to Rav Dosa, who said towards evening time afterwards, whatever the poor gathered shall be ownerless, which doesn't agree with Rav Yochanan. Okay, so the Gemara now is going to try and see if there can be some reconciliation. And it suggests reverse the position cited in the Brisa and attribute the position of Rav Yehuda to Rav Dosa and Rav Dosa to Rav Yehuda. So what we are saying here is that according to the amended version, Rav Yehuda is the one who says that the declaration was made in the evening after the ears had been taken, and Rav Dosa is the one who says that the declaration was made in the morning before the ears were gathered by the poor. So accordingly, Rav Yochanan's statement that the discrete ones and Rav Dosa said one and the same thing demonstrates that he understands that the discrete ones redeemed the produce before it was taken. So the practice of the discrete ones and Rav Dosa, which was the same, doesn't contradict Rav Yochanan's ruling that one's ownership is impaired if his article is stolen and not in his physical possession. So we're not worried if Rav Yehuda doesn't agree with Rav Yochanan, because the problem is it says whatever Rav Dosa says the discrete ones agree with. And if the discrete ones and Rav Dosa are on the same Mishnah of Ma'aser Sheni, that anonymous opinion, according to Rebbe who redacted the Mishnah, everybody has to follow that, including to Rav Yochanan. So then Rav Yochanan's got a problem. And according to those who give a commentary that Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel concluded the anonymous Mishnah, we have a problem again. because we agree with him in every issue of halacha except for 3, and this ain't one of the 3. So we say it's not the end of the world if maybe we amend the positions of the Brisa, where Rav Yehuda is disagreeing with Rav Yochanan, and Rav Dosa is agreeing, because if Rav Dosa is agreeing, we know that Rav Dosa's opinion and the discrete one's opinion is the same. So then there's no contradiction to Rav Yochanan, and then Reish Lakish can't argue with that at all. Makes sense so far? Yes? Simple. All right, let me just go on. So, the Gemara asks, well, there's a problem, right? Because why do you choose to amend and reverse the positions stated in the Brisa? Why don't you maybe work and see if you can reverse Rav Yochanan's statement and amend it to say the discrete ones in Rav Yehuda said one and the same thing? Meaning your whole point in amending the Brisa, guys, is to enable us to say that the discrete ones said whatever will be picked, okay? But why amend the Brisa to accomplish this purpose? Why not leave the Brisa exactly as it is, and instead accomplish this purpose by amending Rav Yochanan's statement to basically read that the discrete ones in Rav Yehuda, who say that the owner says in the morning, whatever the poor will gather, says one and the same thing. So it's saying there's another way you can do it. Instead of trying to connect Rav Dosa with the discrete ones, maybe you want to connect Rav Yehuda with the discrete ones, so that you don't have this issue of loss of control if you don't have possession. So it's trying to see if that is a possibility. Okay, so the Gemara answers and they say, look, either way, anyway, it's insufficient if the Brisa is not reversed. In other words, quite apart from any difficulty with Rav Yochanan's rulings, the positions in the Brisa must be reversed, and we'll tell you why. We'll tell you what the problem is that you've got a secondary problem. What is it? For in the Brisa, it's stated that Rav Yehuda holds to the concept of Bereira. Yet we have learned elsewhere about Rav Yehuda that he does not hold the concept of Bereira. Okay, so where is this problem with Rav Yehuda and Bereira and non-Bereira? Okay, so this is in Rav Yochanan, this is Rabbi Yehuda. Okay, so there's another problem. Even if Rav Yehuda maintains, if we want to interpret Rav Yehuda as saying originally like it was, if you remember, it says whatever will be picked. He says in the morning, whatever will be picked of the poor, we give it to them, sort of thing. Does that make sense? So then you have to adhere to the concept of Bereira. Okay? Now, the problem is that if you don't, you can't make that declaration. So let me explain to you what the concept of Bereira is, and let me tie it in to what's the problem with Rav Yehuda. So we've got problems with Rav Yochanan, and we've got problems with Rav Yehuda. So the concept of Bereira is a legal issue as follows. It's called retroactive clarification. So what does that do? That allows one to implement a legal process and make its validity dependent upon events that have not yet transpired. Okay? Similarly, it allows for the immediate designation of a person or thing whose identity or nature will be retroactively clarified by a later choice. Thus, one may designate now from among a group the person or object he will choose tomorrow and assign a legal status to it. The designation takes effect immediately, and later when the choice is made, the identity of the one designated becomes clarified retroactively. Okay, so let me just take that complicated legal explanation and give you an example of what I'm saying. We do this in a way in Yom Kippur, right? And we do this even technically on Pesach. What do? We take a rooster over our heads on Yom Kippur, or we take money, and we basically say the sins that we have made go into the rooster and be shechted, and let us be conscious of the fact that that could have been us being shechted. All this money we're donating to charity is basically in lieu of the rooster, and that it's almost sacrificing the rooster or donating money in lieu of teshuvah, of the things we've done wrong. But there's an issue. It's that you generally do that on the afternoon or the day of Yom Kippur. Okay? Now, the problem is that then that money, say you do it with money, it then has to go to tzedakah. But when everybody's getting ready for Yom Kippur, can you give it to tzedakah on that day? Probably unlikely. The chicken, are you going to be able to run around and find a non-Jew to buy it? Because no Jew can buy it, even if it's shechted correctly, because no Jew should have something that has got the sins of another Jew and consume it, believe me. So the thing of it is, it's not really consumable at that point. But even let's take Pesach when you sell your chametz. I mean, we're doing a document, and we don't know immediately if in real time it's going to be, done. So this Barera is retroactive clarification and saying I'm selling this chametz. And we know that the Beis Din is going to do the transaction, okay? But the point of it is we make a declaration that we can't touch it, and this is not for our use, even though it's in a house. It's been sold. Does that make sense, guys? So it's a retroactive clarification. I'm going to give you the legal case in terms of how this actually transpired, but you've got an issue here with Rav Yehuda. Because according to the original version of the Brisa, Rav Yehuda says that the owner of the field states in the morning, when all the ears of grain are still in his possession, and he is empowered to render them ownerless because he's got control over them. Whatever the poor will gather today will be ownerless as of now. Now, the problem is at the time of his declaration, it's unclear which ears of grain, if any, the owner is making ownerless, because nothing's been stolen yet, or let's not say stolen in that case, because the poor are not trying to steal. They've just done the halacha about taking 2 ears of grain that was left from the harvester as opposed to 3. But it's certainly untied, and it's certainly they're not entitled to that third one, but they're ignorant of the halacha. But if you don't know what's going to be taken, and then what are you specifically making ownerless? So in other words, Rav Yehuda maintains that even if the poor do eventually take more ears than they're entitled to, we have to employ this concept of retroactive clarification to establish those ears which are presently, guys, unidentified as being ownerless as of now. So in other words, we can't have specifics. The specifics will only be revealed after what's gone missing, but not at this time. So therefore, we have to make a declaration that everything we forgive of it, or in other words, not really. We can say whatever will be taken, but you don't have the specifics. So how can you make that statement? According to those that hold by Barera, they're saying you can. Because afterwards you can say, look, I made that declaration, I had it in my possession, and afterwards we'll calculate the damage or the loss. But in the meantime, I'm making that for what's going to happen. And those that argue with this case of Barera say that you can't do that because it's so unspecific that what happens if somebody takes your whole field? What, are you going to forgive them of everything? You know, I mean, how vague is it? Is it allowed to be that vague? Does that make sense, guys, as far as what I'm saying?
Damon, this whole thing is to protect the poor, because one doesn't want to accuse them of stealing, because that's not their intention. They know that they can gather stuff at the paya of a field, the corner, yeah. and the owner wants he's preempting their taking it and having a bit of sympathy and empathy towards them. That's the whole issue.
Yeah, no, so the issue is in case they ignorantly take more than they're entitled to, because they don't obey Hillel's halacha.
Because of leket.
Yeah,
where
for
it's where
leket. So the thing of it is they take 3 ears of grain instead of 2 ears of
instead of
grain.
two.
And then they have to tithe it because that other ear they're not entitled to. So that has to be set aside for tithing apart from the theft issue, according to Tosfot. But we're coming to an issue now of even if you want to say that it's in their possession and you can somehow not have an issue with Rav Yochanan, because in your possession you say, now that it's in my possession, in my control, I can then forgive. I've got it. When it's taken from me, it's not in my possession to let go of. So what am I forgiving? But even if you want to say, well, while it's still in their possession, this issue of Bereira comes up with Rav Yehuda, not Rav Yochanan, because we learned that in certain times in the Mishnah, Rav Yehuda agrees with Bereira, so that in the morning you can declare this, and whatever damage is done after the day, you cover it for retroactive clarification. But we learn elsewhere in the Mishnah that Rav Yehuda doesn't agree with the concept of Bereira, which means he'd have a problem us interpreting it with that statement, saying he will give it away. It would then have to be after the case when you've assessed the damage, but then that would be a problem with Rav Yochanan, because you can't give away what's not in your possession or control. So we have to see if Rav Yehuda agrees with the concept of Bereira or not. Do you see?
Why would it be?
Why
if he doesn't agree with it, then what? Then it falls by the wayside.
No, well, if he doesn't agree with it, then there's a problem with interpretation, because it said basically the following. It says, Rav Yehuda says, in the morning, the owner of the field stands and says, whatever the poor will gather today shall be ownerless. So if he doesn't believe in Bereira, retroactive clarification, he can't make that statement in the morning because he has no idea what's going to disappear from his field during the day. So, so then he wouldn't, there'd be a problem with it. It's only okay to say that Rav Yehuda said that in the Mishnah, because what we're saying is he does say it in the Mishnah, but we pick up elsewhere in Shas he doesn't agree with Bereira, which means something's wrong. Because otherwise he would never make that statement, or he's contradicting himself later. Again, the whole point of the Gemara is looking for the rabbi's consistencies throughout Shas. If ever they make a statement in a different opposite to what they've done, we've got to see why. Is the context different? That's why. So, in other words, he doesn't agree with concept of Bereira in other Gemaras, and in this one he does. So what's the difference? Is the inconsistency, or is the situation different? So that's what we're learning about Rav Yehuda. Okay, guys.